I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Amazon pulls out of New York, scrapping its plan to build a second headquarters in the city after backlash from some residents and politicians. We will speak with local officials who opposed the deal. Plus, Amazon had pledged to hire 25,000 workers in coming years, but was criticized for the almost $3 billion in financial incentives. Will this impact how other big tech firms plan to expand? And Congress works to get the Green New Deal off the ground as the Senate just passed a spending bill to avert a government shutdown. We'll speak to Representative Earl Blumenauer of Oregon. Now to the top tech story of the day. A backlash of government officials has caused Amazon to back out of plans to build a campus in New York City. The deal had promised 40,000 jobs over the next 2 decades with an average salary of $150,000. One problem with the grand plan, though, local opposition was fervent from the beginning. Lawmakers resented being excluded from negotiations for the deal. Community groups feared rising rents in the neighborhood would push out longtime residents. Now, New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo is giving his thoughts, saying, quote, "The New York State Senate has done tremendous damage. They should be held accountable for this lost economic opportunity." Joining us now to discuss, Democratic Queens City Council member Jimmy Van Bramer, who had opposed the deal from the start. Also with me here in the studio, Bloomberg Tech Senior Executive Editor Brad Stone. So, Mr. Van Bramer, you are claiming victory here, running a sort of victory lap. But is this really a win?
Well, no one's running a victory lap. But what I would say is this is a victory because we fought for our values. We challenged this deal from the beginning because Amazon has a track record of not treating its workers right and is being horribly anti-union. We exposed them during this process over the last few months where they declared once and for all that they would fight any attempts of any employees of Amazon directly to organize. That's antithetical to my values as a progressive New York City Democrat. I think it's antithetical to most of us in New York City, and they refused to budge. At the end of the day, Amazon chose to leave. No one killed Amazon. Amazon walked off the field because they refused to change their ways, and they simply didn't want, I think, to risk having to allow their employees to organize, which is outrageous.
Now, Brad, Amazon has turned some of its supporters into enemies as well. This coming from Mayor Bill de Blasio, who said, "We gave Amazon the opportunity to be a good neighbor and do business in the greatest city in the world. Instead of working with the community, Amazon threw away that opportunity." If Amazon can't recognize what that's worth, its competitors will.
Well, I think Mayor de Blasio is doing some damage control here. He was a proponent of the deal that is now blown up in his face. But look, this is a catastrophic outcome of this year-and-a-half process for everyone involved. You know, Amazon was looking for a partner, which it felt that it didn't quite have anymore in Seattle. It conducted this very public search. It did make mistakes in New York City. I think it should have trotted out Jeff Bezos more publicly to support this deal. I think maybe putting him in a room with politicians and officials like the councilman might have helped. But I also think on the other side, and I would like to ask the councilman, you know, you're never going to change Amazon's stripes. It has historically been, you know, anti-union when it comes to its fulfillment centers. These are white-collar jobs in particular in Queens. It's going to sell, it has said, technology like facial recognition to the federal government and departments like ICE. So what is losing these 25,000 jobs? How does that help your constituents at all, many of whom supported the deal?
Well, look, I think it helps our city in the long run. It also helps the nation, quite frankly, because if we had not fought this fight in New York City, then we would have had other corporations also saying, look, you let Amazon not only come to New York City, but get $3 billion in taxpayer money, declaring themselves to be so anti-union that they would not allow members of their workforce to organize. If we allow them to do that, then everyone else coming after them will say, we're doing the same thing. And I feel like at the end of the day, this is a fight that needed to be fought. And also with respect to their use and support of ICE's work against immigrants in this country, Queens is the most diverse county in the country. We have so many immigrants, both documented and undocumented. How could we as elected officials who represent both a lot of union workers and a lot of immigrants allow Amazon to dictate the terms of this deal, dictate the terms of their arrival? The truth is, Amazon could have fought. They could have actually proposed new ways to do it. And I agree with you, Amazon didn't really fight very hard here. We never saw or heard from Jeff Bezos once. And there was almost no discussion from the time that this deal was announced in early November to today. And I was surprised at the announcement today. Since that time, there's been almost zero work on behalf of Amazon, the governor and the mayor's office, to actually try and solve the problems. Even organized labor said to Amazon that if you agree to be neutral, we might be able to go along with this.
Congressman, let's talk about what the people wanted, though, or what it appears they wanted. Amazon says 70% of New Yorkers were in favor. We looked at an independent poll that found 57% of New Yorkers in favor. Now, when you ask them the next question, well, are you in favor of $3 billion in incentives? New Yorkers are more split, 46% support, 44% oppose. But could you also have done anything differently to keep Amazon at the table?
Well, look, again, this is their decision to take their marbles and go home. I met with Amazon, took some criticism from some folks, and I believe that they, at the end of the day, were unwilling to move on anything. I believe it's part of their core values, their corporate values, to crush unions and any ability of their workers to organize, and they didn't want to change. And that's on them. I also think that there was almost no effort to respond to the criticism initially. The rollout was totally mishandled. Doing this in secret, bypassing community review, they were almost destined to fail. But even worse was how they've handled the last 3 months. Their appearances before the city council were dreadfully bad, and they were simply unable and nimble to move and maneuver through what they were going through.
Brad, how much damage has Amazon done to itself here?
No, I think it will recover easily long term, and those jobs will go to Northern Virginia and Nashville and all the other places where Amazon has offices. You know, they're not going to change their anti-union stance. They're not going to change, where they sell their technology. And I think New York and Queens in particular loses out. I mean, look, could Amazon have done this differently? I think they were unprepared for selecting a location that ultimately had this level of opposition, and they didn't have the tools at their disposal to counter the groundswell of action that that came from AOC and her allies. They could have done things differently, but I also think New York, unfortunately, is kind of sacrificing the longer-term economic benefits that Amazon would have brought to the city.
Now, Mr. Van Bramer, and I apologize, we referred to you as a congressman, but you're a city council member.
I appreciate the promotion.
Are you at all concerned about political consequences for you?
Well, look, I understand that there are people who are angry today because of what happened. And look, there are consequences when we take stands. But I'm willing to stand up for what I believe in. I'm willing to fight even the most powerful man in the world because of where I come from and what I believe. And so if there are people who will not support me going forward because I chose to defend working men and women, because I chose to defend immigrants, undocumented and documented, because I chose to defend the city council's meaningful role in land use review, then so be it. I know why I took on this fight, and I'm proud of it.
All right. New York City Council member Jimmy Van Bramer, thank you so much for joining us. Bloomberg Tech Senior Executive Editor Brad Stone, as always. Coming up, the Green New Deal. Mitch McConnell wants to put it to a vote, and Democrats are calling him out for it. We speak to one of the bill's co-sponsors, Congressman Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, about that and the Amazon news today. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. The Green New Deal, it is a sweeping proposal championed by newly elected U.S. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The ambitious plan proposes strategies and solutions to combat climate change, reduce income inequality, provide health care to all Americans. Meantime, a strategy by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to put it to a vote is being called a move to shift the spotlight onto divisions among Democrats. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called McConnell's plan a, quote, cheap, cynical ploy. Joining me now from Washington, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat who represents Oregon's 3rd District. He's also the co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. Congressman, welcome. What do you make of the pushback here?
Well, it's understandable. My Republican friends put through a tax bill that cost $2 trillion additional deficit spending, something that was written literally while they were voting on it, never had a committee hearing, lavishing massive tax breaks on people who didn't need them. And now they're suggesting that having a broader view, a bold vision for rebuilding and renewing the country, fighting climate change, and dealing with things like income inequality is something that is somehow beyond our capacity. I think that's wrong. I think it is consistent with what they've tried to do in terms of shifting the subject away from the failures of Republicans in the White House and failed policies dealing with issues of climate change and economic development. We're going to try and provide an alternative.
What do you say to Republicans who label this as socialism or say it's just too expensive?
Well, look at policies we've got now. We just passed a farm bill that is providing massive subsidy for farmers that don't necessarily need it at the expense of normal farmers and ranchers, smaller scale activities. There's socialism that is involved with supporting the defense industry. What we're doing with a nuclear weapons program that's going to cost us over $1 trillion for weapons that we really don't need and can't afford. Socialism in the eye of the beholder. Why is it that we can't negotiate drug pricing for the federal government, who is the largest consumer of pharmaceuticals in the world? Socialism is in the eye of the beholder.
Now, I do want to ask you about this Amazon New York situation, even though it's not happening in your state. Do you think that there are winners and losers here, or just losers?
Well, you know, it's an interesting statement, and we're watching around the country. People are looking at the consequence of urban development that places strains on the fabric of community, and it needs to be done right. It seems clear that there wasn't really the groundwork that was laid to work with the people in the affected community. There are some upsides that some looked at, but we've seen in Seattle, candidly, there have been some real problems that have been visited. Every successful city has a housing crisis in this country, and putting together multi-billion-dollar packages of incentives without really being able to address the challenges that people perceive in their community. In New York, a transportation system that I'll be charitable and say is strained. There is a housing crisis there. People are concerned what would happen in a neighborhood that would be rapidly gentrified. I think that it's a message that every community needs to look at with businesses that want to expand their footprint, is that you start with working with the community and trying to deal with needs that people have to be able to accommodate them. There was enough money on the table there that I think you could have fashioned something that would have been a win-win situation.
Now, you've been one of the biggest advocates in Congress for legalization of marijuana. There was a hearing this week on marijuana banking, but it doesn't seem like most banks are hot on offering services to the marijuana industry. Do you feel like there's real movement in Congress on this?
Oh, absolutely. And the movement started around the country. We're watching where the public has voted. We've watched state after state approve initiatives to legalize some form of marijuana. Now 47 states have some form of state legal marijuana. Now, the problem with the banking industry, it's not that they don't want the money. They desperately would like to do business with a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that is growing with leaps and bounds. But the federal government has an absolutely insane policy to deny these businesses that are legal at the state level from having access to financial services. I've worked on this issue for years, from coast to coast. I've never met a single person who thinks there's any benefit in forcing state legal enterprises in cannabis to not have banking services if you care about money laundering, tax evasion, and theft. So this was a very critical initial hearing. I think it will pass. And I think we'll watch other things that move forward in this Congress, like dealing with bipartisan legislation on research and allowing veterans in states where it's legal to be able to work with the Veterans Administration on medical marijuana. This train has left the station, and the hearing this week was an important mark along the way.
All right, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, we continue our coverage of Amazon pulling the plug in New York City. What the departure means for the state's real estate market next. And we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. JP Morgan Chase plans to run trials using cryptocurrency for clients of its wholesale payments business. Dubbed JPM Coin, the initial tests will reportedly involve only a tiny portion of payments at the start. The initiative is based on blockchain technology, the decentralized public ledger for cryptocurrency transactions. Returning with our coverage of Amazon, meantime, the e-commerce giant's abrupt breakup with New York City sent a shockwave through the city's real estate community. Thursday, Amazon's arrival had promised thousands of high-paying jobs and economic opportunities. Now the reversal has many concerned over its impact on the market and the power tech companies have over the real estate market. Joining us to discuss, Redfin chief economist Daryl Fairweather. Daryl, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with, you worked at Amazon for a couple of years before joining Redfin. So curious what your perspective is as a former employee of the fact that Amazon faced so much backlash in New York City and has also faced backlash in your hometown of Seattle.
That's right. Just a few years ago, Amazon was going head-to-head with our city council, and we're really kind of cast as the villains when it comes to housing affordability. Now in New York City, they're up against some of those same concerns, and I think they just don't want to have to deal with that all over again. They want to go someplace where they're going to be welcomed with open arms. Amazon is a very customer-focused company, and they'd rather just focus on supplying goods and services to their customers and not get into issues like housing affordability or wealth inequality.
How is this going to impact or not impact the New York real estate market? Like if Amazon ended up in Long Island City, what would have happened? And now that they're not going to be there, what happens?
Yeah, we've talked to some of our real estate agents in Long Island City, and they've told us that Long Island City was already on the up and up. There was a lot of investment even before Amazon made their announcement, and there's been a lot of growth in new construction, and Amazon leaving probably won't change that. Amazon selected Long Island City for a reason. They have a really good proximity to Manhattan, and it's going to be growing with or without Amazon.
I have a chart here in the Bloomberg showing the distribution of Amazon's real estate expansion. Most of it, the majority of it, it goes to data centers. This would be office space. Data centers is in the white here. Office space is blue. So this really is just a tiny portion of Amazon's real estate expansion, which probably speaks to your point. You know, what does it mean for Northern Virginia? I mean, will it bring benefits, you know, when it comes to the real estate markets to Northern Virginia, or could we see pushback from those residents years down the line?
Well, Amazon announced that they were going to do another HQ2 in DC in Northern Virginia and also put 5,000 jobs in Nashville. And those areas are going to be much better able to absorb new migrants, new jobs. Nashville in particular has had a really good track record of being able to absorb all the people coming to their city. It's one of the top migration destinations according to our Redfin data. And because they've been able to grow their housing supply, housing has stayed affordable. Northern Virginia has a lot more room to grow as well, and they probably won't face as much backlash there.
So Amazon now saying that they're not going to further pursue an HQ2 search. They're going to stick with Northern Virginia, stick with Nashville as a sort of mini hub. Do you think that's a loss for anyone?
So I think that those cities are very able to absorb new Amazon jobs. I think what's going to happen is that there are going to be some cities over the future that are going to be eager to take on new jobs, whether they're from Amazon or other tech companies like Apple, Microsoft. And there are going to be some cities that really have to deal with their own housing affordability issues before they can absorb new migrants. New York is an example, San Francisco is another example, and so is Seattle. They're going to have to start looking at rezoning, increasing housing density before they can start to take in more jobs. Otherwise, they're just going to see their housing rates go up, and it's going to be more and more unaffordable to live in those places.
Now, you're a Seattle resident, so very
Yes.
familiar with the pushback that Amazon has gotten there. Do you think that Amazon needs to do a better job dealing with its impact on the community?
I think from Amazon's perspective, they've done a lot of positive things for Seattle. I came to Seattle for Amazon because I was offered an attractive job, and I've really enjoyed living in Seattle. And I think Seattle has benefited from the migrants that have come here. But at the same time, Amazon feels like they could go to another city that has more room to grow and bring prosperity there. Anytime that a city experiences a lot of prosperity, they have to deal with inequality, and the residents who've been there for a long time see their rents go up and have to grapple with that. So I don't think that's necessarily Amazon's responsibility. I think that it's up to local governments to really plan ahead and figure out what they're going to do ahead of time in order to absorb prosperity.
All right, Redfin Chief Economist Daryl Fairweather joining us from Seattle there. Appreciate you stopping by. Coming up, this local politician has been at the center of the Amazon HQ2 backlash. Our conversation with New York State Senator Michael Gianaris is next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Back to our top story. Amazon scrapping its plans to build a campus in New York City. Before the e-commerce behemoth pulled the plug, there was one person that could potentially have scuttled the deal single-handedly, and that was State Senator Michael Gianaris, who represents Long Island City and was nominated to a state board with veto power over this deal. He joins us now from New York. Also with me here, Bloomberg Tech's global executive editor, Tom Giles. Senator Gianaris, thank you so much for coming back here. Do you think this is really a win for you?
Look, I don't view this as a day to celebrate. It's just a matter of standing up for New York and hopefully beginning a long overdue conversation nationally about whether these corporate incentive and subsidy programs are worth it. You have the largest company in the country with the richest man on earth heading it, coming to New York, but only if they're able to squeeze out $3 billion of public dollars in order to do so. So I don't think that was worth it. I think the way Amazon reacted to it proved my point, that they were unwilling to deal with legitimate concerns that this community had. They negotiated this deal in secret, and when it was discovered by the public outrage disturbed them. All we did was raise our hand and say, we have some questions about this deal. We don't think it's necessarily a good idea. And instead of dealing with that, they picked up their ball and went home. So it says a lot about them and how they do business.
Tom, you've been following developments all day. What is the latest that you're hearing?
I mean, the latest is that, Goldman Sachs CEO Blankfein came out very critical of the backlash.
I actually have the tweet. After killing Amazon's New York City headquarters, not sure some progressive Democrats deserve either title. This move was both anti-progress, negative for development and tech jobs, and anti-democratic. Polls show 70% of New Yorkers were in favor. Victory lap for them, not for New York City.
I guess I would put the question back on the Senator Gianaris. When it's all said and done, the sense is that the real turning point was the possibility that you were going to join that commission that had veto power over this. What is your, I'd love to hear your reaction to the idea that you were very much the linchpin in getting this deal scuttled.
Well, that's, as much as I like to give myself all sorts of credit, it's a little bit laughable. First of all, as we talk today, I do not sit on this board. I was a nominee. The governor gets to appoint me or decline the appointment. He did not do either, even as of this day, as we're sitting here talking. The fact is there was a surge of opposition. I saw the tweet you just had up there. That 70% figure was a figure by a poll commissioned by Amazon itself, so believe that number if you want. I choose not to because I live in this community and I've talked to people on the streets over the last several months and I know how they feel about this. There was great concern about what it was going to do to the housing market, great concern about the already stressed subway system, the already stressed schools that we had. And there was never, to this day, there was never a dialogue about how is New York City and Long Island City specifically going to accommodate the presence of this giant footprint that they wanted to place there. All they said was, give us the $3 billion. We don't want to talk about any of the rest of it. And if we don't get our way, we're leaving. And so this is how Amazon does business. They did it in Seattle when the city council dared to try and raise some revenue to provide homeless services due to the homelessness crisis that was caused in part by Amazon's effect on the housing market there. They threatened not to finish constructing a building that had already started until the city council rolled it back. Well, Amazon has to learn that they're big, yes, but they're not bigger than New York City, and they should not be bigger than any government body in this country that speaks for its people. They don't get to dictate to governments what they need. They should work collaboratively and like real corporate, like responsible corporate citizens when they want to enter a community.
Senator, fair point there on the way Amazon characterized support. Amazon says 70% of New Yorkers supported this. We looked at an independent poll that says 57% of New Yorkers support this. But then when you look at the second question about whether they support $3 billion in financial incentives, they're more split. Right. 46% support that. So that said, there was potential here if you had worked it out. Now you haven't worked it out. Amazon has pulled out. Is that a loss for New York?
Well, look, we always like jobs and job growth, and this was an opportunity that may or may not be presenting itself. By the way, in their statement announcing this decision, they also said they're going to continue to grow their presence at other New York City locations where they already have a presence. So one wonders how many people are going to be grown into those other areas without the promise of any of these incentives at all, and how much that will compensate for this decision. But we also should put it in context. New York City, over the last decade or more, has been growing new jobs at a rate of about 90,000 per year. So when you talk about 25,000 jobs over 10 to 15 years, which is what this was, it's about 2% of the normal job growth in New York City. So it's not insignificant. We all want jobs and greater employment, but it's also not some earth-shattering situation the way it's been presented.
Senator Gianaris, this is Tom again. We've done some analysis that shows that potential tax receipts, income taxes from the individuals that would have moved to New York, the different corporate taxes that you would have been able to collect from Amazon would really have washed away that $3 billion in incentives. Isn't that, in a sense, I mean, aren't we talking about tax receipts that could have been used to improve the infrastructure, the subway, and in turn create more jobs for New York?
Well, it's an interesting argument, except I would say to you that New York City has been growing over the last decade, and yet the misplaced priorities of decision makers has not led to investment in that critical infrastructure. And so I have no reason to believe this would be any different in this case. At the end of the day, this was a giveaway to a corporation that demanded it in order to come here. And the deal never should have been made in the first place. And once it was, when people who would be most affected by it said, let's put a pause on this and discuss what this means for all of us, they decided to leave.
Now, Senator, I asked Councilman Van Bramer this earlier on the show. All of this considered, everything you've just said, do you have any concerns about the political consequences now for you?
No, I don't. I don't do things because of the political benefit or consequences. I'm doing the best thing for my community, and ultimately they're the ones who judge whether I get to continue representing them. But I am confident in the way I've comported myself over these last several months as it relates to this deal. This would have been a deal that would devastate the community of Long Island City. There was no consideration, zero consideration about what this would do to the people of Long Island City who would get priced out of their homes, the parents who already don't have enough school seats for their kids, or the commuters who, as it exists today, cannot get on the 7 train on Vernon Boulevard, which is where this facility was going to be built. I can't even fathom what the effect of increasing the population of that community by 50%, which is what this would have done, what that would have done to that neighborhood without any consideration of the effects of those things. And the people spoke up and said, wait a minute, what is this going to mean for us? Who is speaking for us? And the moment someone started speaking for them, Amazon grabbed its suitcase and left. So it tells you a lot about how much they care about the communities they affect. There was a symposium just the other day where a real estate investor flat out said, I don't care about people who are getting displaced because of all the ancillary benefits of this deal. Well, I do care about the people that would be displaced. Those are the people I represent. And the fact that we care about that and ask questions about that should not lead to someone acting like a petulant child and picking up their ball and leaving town, which is what Amazon did here.
All right. New York State Senator Michael Gianaris, appreciate you stopping by to share your views here. Bloomberg's Tom Giles, as always, good to have you with us. Coming up, we discuss Amazon's influence among investors and venture capitalists and what this decision means. This is Bloomberg. So what does Amazon's decision to pull out of New York mean for tech investing? We're joined now by Heather Redmond, Flying Fish Partners co-founder and managing partner in Seattle, who we've spoken to before about Amazon's influence in its hometown. And with us in New York, David Kirkpatrick, founder of Techonomy. Heather, obviously you're very familiar with the impact that Amazon has had on Seattle. What do you think the broader impact of this decision is on the tech economy, or will be?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting for New York in particular. I mean, they've obviously had a thriving tech economy for a while, and there are some great companies in New York, and there's been a lot of press coverage about Google moving in and increasing its presence there. And Amazon is in New York anyway, even before this latest sort of decision. But what I think is interesting is that what we've seen here in Seattle, and certainly what we've seen in Silicon Valley, is that when you have major anchor tenant companies like Amazon that are on the cutting edge and are continually coming up with new businesses to start, it's very valuable to the rest of the startup ecosystem. It attracts venture capitalists. It attracts other large companies, which we've certainly seen here in Seattle. All of the big boys are here in large part because of Amazon and Microsoft being headquartered here. And so New York has really lost, I think, an opportunity to add that anchor tenant to their tech ecosystem. And that will have reverberations, I'm quite sure.
David, we've talked about techlash on the show. That's my word for this sort of pushback against big visionary tech companies that, in the past have, almost always been welcomed. Do you think this is part of a longer running trend?
Well, I think income inequality is a huge force in American and global culture right now, and the fact that it was the world's richest man's company and a district representative by the most fist-raised congressperson in the new Congress does play in. I mean, there was a feeling of wrongness that these tax breaks would be going to Jeff Bezos' company. But I would just disagree with your other guest. I don't think, as a New Yorker, this is not that big of a deal for the New York tech economy. Look at the scale of Google's expansion that's underway. way. They just announced a huge new campus in addition to the one they already have, where they're gigantic occupants of a space in Chelsea. I do think it would have been better for New York if this deal had gone through, but I also know there's tremendous concerns about gentrification, and Amazon did not engage with the community effectively. So I think it is somewhat petulant, as the state senator in your earlier segment suggested, that they just, when they got in resistance, they just said, you know what, we're going home. I don't admire that.
Heather, look, Amazon could have stuck at the table longer and tried to work it out, right?
Yeah, they certainly could have. And I think one of the things that it's hard to internalize if you're on the outside, and particularly if you're in early stage tech, is, as I am and as your other guests may be too, I think we don't understand how hard it is for these very large companies to make moves quickly. And so for Amazon to make a big investment in New York and in continuing this process with a very uncertain outcome right now, I mean, the populace and the politicians are all over the map. I think it's very hard for them to say, yes, we can bet the future of some really big initiatives that we have on this process going the way it was advertised to go for us. I mean, when I think of sort of who failed in this overall picture, I think it's very much the political leaders of New York. When you think about who should have had the conversations with the unions, who should have had the conversations with the representatives of that specific community, why was the senator that you had on earlier not brought into the confidence of the mayor and the governor earlier on to say, hey, this is what we think we should do and why. Here's what the company is prepared to do. What do you think? Let's get this all done so that we don't have this big gaping hole of uncertainty in front of a very large company that has to build office space for a growing workforce. The planning that's required for that is just huge, and the risk that they would be exposed to if they stuck it out and then ultimately failed to get approvals for what they have decided to build it's really a large risk. And as a shareholder of a publicly held company, you wouldn't want your company to take that kind of risk if they didn't have to.
David, obviously we have this. We've got the backlash against Facebook, Congress, people looking into it, Google as well. How does this impact your outlook on tech for this year?
Well, big tech is in the doghouse. Another story that the Washington Post reported today is that Facebook may be paying a multi-billion-dollar fine to the FTC for violating its consent decree over privacy. So, look, big tech is not handling itself well. I don't think Amazon is used to dealing with pushback, and I think they showed that here. Facebook clearly has proven in the last 2 years they don't know how to deal with pushback. Facebook is these are immature companies in general, and I think they've become haughty and somewhat arrogant. And I think we see that in both situations. I want to reiterate, I think it would have been better for New York if Amazon came here. But the entire process that Amazon drove from the beginning, announcing its second headquarters project, was super secret, in very many people's opinion, quite furtive and manipulative, the way they pulled all these cities in, gathered all this data, everybody was throwing money at them. It was not an attractive process, in my opinion, and I don't think the company handled it well.
All right. David Kirkpatrick, founder of Techonomy, and Heather Redmond, Flying Fish Partners co-founder and managing partner. Lots more to discuss as we watch the fallout from this. Still ahead, was the Amazon deal a good one stifled by bad politics? We'll talk about that with a supporter next. This is Bloomberg. Real estate flipping has gone high tech. That is thanks to algorithms and some Silicon Valley venture capital. Zillow, better known for operating apps and websites that help buyers find homes, but recently the Seattle-based company has been growing its instant offers business. Zillow now buys houses, fixes them up, and resells them, and it earns fees for providing simple and fast transactions. Well, a new study shows New York City is the best place on the planet for technology. Some people in Silicon Valley might quibble with that, but New York ranked first in an index measuring 30 global tech-heavy cities analyzed by real estate brokerage Savills. Amazon may have had the right idea, but politicians didn't see it that way. Now, with the tech giant out of the city, what are the impacts New York might face as a tech hub? Here to discuss, we've got Julie Samuels, Executive Director of Tech NYC, which represents the companies and leaders that make up the city's fast-growing entrepreneurial high-tech industry. Also with us, Bloomberg Intelligence's Jitendra Rawal. So, Julie, as I understand it, you were in favor of this deal. How big a loss is this?
Yeah, definitely in favor of the deal, still would be. It's really disappointing. It's a big loss. You're talking about tens of thousands of jobs that as of this morning were going to come here and as of right now are not. So while we're incredibly disappointed and we think this is a huge missed opportunity, both for the tech ecosystem here, but much more broadly for the city and even the region. The tech ecosystem, which I think we'll talk about, is still growing. Tech in New York is in really good shape, as you just said at the outset, and we still feel quite bullish about that.
Now, Amazon shares at Jitendra didn't change much today, ended the day 1% down. Does this impact Amazon's business?
Longer term implications are different, but actually if you look at the expectations for this year and next year, it really doesn't impact them because this was mostly a multi-year plan to expand corporate offices, and the spending that's going up this year is mostly on the AWS and logistics and content and those kind of areas. So this doesn't impact the near-term expectations for Amazon at all, but longer-term implications with the political backlash, regulations, this, that, those things continue to be an overhang.
Now, Julie, Amazon still has 5,000 jobs in the city already. Google has a big and growing presence in the city. Facebook as well. So what does this mean for New York's tech ecosystem? Is this an opportunity? Or, does this now leave a vacuum?
So I think you got to think about what we see here already. Like you said, Amazon is committed to New York with 5,000 jobs, and I understand those will continue to grow. New York has seen incredible, really, really great incremental job growth in the tech sector. We have well over 300,000 tech jobs here across the city. That number will continue to grow. Companies want access, tech companies obviously, want access to the unique things that you find in urban landscapes, particularly New York. Diverse talent base, amazing academic institutions, cultural and arts institutions, public transit when it's working, these things that are so uniquely New York. So these companies will continue to come here, I have no doubt. They will continue to grow here. And you'll also see, I think, that as companies we don't think of as traditional tech companies increasingly are becoming tech companies, that the tech ecosystem will continue its growth. However, what we're talking about, the missed opportunity here is a really big bet. We're talking about thousands of jobs here and there over years. This was a commitment of between 25,000 and 40,000 jobs. And that is, that's disappointing to lose that in one day.
From what you're hearing from tech entrepreneurs, tech employees, what do they say?
By and large, we're hearing disappointment, particularly from the leaders of the community who are looking and have been so diligently growing this ecosystem. What the promise of Amazon was for the ecosystem wasn't just the jobs, but the idea that as you attract more engineers and more entrepreneurs, as you train more New Yorkers to be those engineers and entrepreneurs, and they come through the Amazon ecosystem, they come through the Google ecosystem, and then they leave and they build their own companies and they hire their networks, and that's how an ecosystem grows. And that's what took a hit today.
Meantime, Jitendra, another big story we've been following today, the Washington Post reporting that Facebook could face a multi-billion-dollar fine from the FTC to settle their investigation into Facebook's privacy practices. We don't know the exact number here, but how big a blow is that?
If you look at what happened with Google when they got hit by the fine, it was basically a one-quarter hit and moved on. But with Facebook, the worry is more about what's coming next. The last record fine was $20 million. So we don't know how big this one is going to be in that context, but it's about what's coming next is what sort of scares us more than what we saw with Google.
A little bit more from this Washington Post report. The fine has yet to be agreed on by both parties. The FTC could take Facebook to court if negotiations fall through. More broadly, could something like this force Facebook to change its business model, and then could that have a big impact on Facebook's business.
So yeah, so one catalyst for the second half, and actually next year as well, is them trying to merge Instagram messaging services and all those to monetize everything better. And if regulators sort of get in the way over here, that could derail expectations. So that is a risk for them from a business standpoint, especially it being a big catalyst, given stories is where growth is at for Facebook.
Julie, do you feel the same backlash against Facebook in New York that we've seen in, among customers and in the media?
I don't think so. I mean, Facebook is a really great neighbor here in New York. They're part of the broader tech ecosystem in New York. And one of the things about tech companies in New York, today's news aside, is that they're really increasingly part of a very diverse economy. Tech is not the only economic giant in New York. In fact, it's not the economic giant in New York. And that creates a much different political dynamic here.
All right. Well, I did sit down with Sheryl Sandberg a couple of weeks ago, the COO of Facebook, and she told me they were in talks with the FTC, so we're going to keep watching how this one unfolds. Julie Samuels, Executive Director of Tech NYC, Jitendra Wawal of Bloomberg Intelligence, thank you both so much for joining us. All right, that wraps up a big day. The big news today, Amazon pulling out of New York City. We are going to continue to cover the fallout from this right here on Bloomberg Television. Of course, we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.